always feel most present in the moment when doing extreme sports. Sometimes in my excitement to get this feeling, I get into a little bit of trouble. A couple years back, I was on a surf trip in Nicaragua. A few friends and I had hired a boat and a guide to access a remote point break. When we arrived at the wave, the conditions weren't quite right. The tide was too high, and the waves were big. But I'm a little stubborn. So I hopped in and paddled out anyway. Sure enough, when that first wave approached, I knew I was in over my head. Literally. That wave picked me up and threw me under the water. As I tossed and turned under the darkness of the wave, the pressure from the water squeezed all the air out of my body. Now, I had been in this situation countless times before, so I went to do what I always do. That's kick my right leg, engage the leash that's attached to my board, and float up to the surface. Except this time, when I went to kick my leg, there was nothing there. It was as though the board was gone. And I panicked. And I immediately started to try and crawl my way up to the surface, desperate for that first breath of air. When I got there, I took it before the second wave came and pulled me back under. Eventually, the set of waves passed, and I was able to remain at the surface. As I started my swim back towards the boat, I pulled in my leash to see what had happened to my board. When I got to the end of the board, I saw that all that remained was a small chunk of it. The force of the wave had snapped the board in two. As I sat in the boat, catching my breath, all I could think about was how grateful I was that my mother had not just witnessed what had happened. Naturally, when I started to study engineering, I wanted to try to find a sneaky way to combine my love for surfing with engineering. And that's when I discovered artificial surfing reefs. An artificial surfing reef is just like a regular reef. It's a structure placed just offshore, can be made out of rocks or giant sandbags, and it has two purposes. Just like a natural reef, it knocks down the energy of the waves before they get to shore, reducing the potential for erosion along the beach. And the second purpose, if you design this structure just right, you can create this beautiful, perfect surfing wave. Now, despite the topic, I still found engineering to be a bit of a struggle. I always remember, while my classmates and I were so consumed with exams and assignments, there was our other classmate, Scotty. Scotty was always smiling. I couldn't figure out how he was so happy when the rest of us were so overwhelmed. What did he have that I didn't? Towards the end of my degree, I met someone else who seemed pretty happy. And she was pretty cute, too. So I wrapped my arms around her. We moved off to the city to start our life together. I had all the boxes checked. I had the job. I had the girl. We had a great condo to live in. I was all ready to just settle and coast through life. It became apparent very quickly that this coasting turned into a real grind. So I became the ultimate weekend warrior. I'd pack our weekends so full of trips and adventures. My brilliant idea was to be so tired by the end of the weekend that it didn't matter that I had to sit in a cubicle all week long. Sure enough, Monday morning would come, the alarm would go off, and I'd get up, and I'd put on my engineering outfit, my collared shirt, my khaki pants, my brown shoes. I'd walk out the door, I'd catch the bus, I'd ride downtown, and I'd sit in my cubicle, and Weekend Mike would die. I spent all week trying to bring him back to life. I'd email my friends back and forth, planning the next adventure. At the same time, we joke back and forth that we were living the dream, when in fact it was a lie. I'd go home each night to complain to my wife. This went on for more than a decade. I remember it was a Wednesday in November. When I came home from work, my wife was sitting on the couch, and she told me she was no longer in love with me. In that moment, this sound, this noise, this groan escaped deep from the abyss of my shattered soul. And then I had a realization. I had heard this noise before. This same noise had come from my mother in our childhood home when my parents were divorcing. I spent the weeks that followed in the evenings walking the dark, wet streets as the November rain poured down its pain. I carried a journal to record all these new thoughts and realizations that I was having. With each breakthrough, I got further clarity on why the relationship had ended. Each truth would hit me with a painful wave of emotions. But I had to understand what had gone wrong in order to never feel that amount of pain again. I also knew that if I were to re-engineer my life, I had to do so from a strong foundation. And that meant leaving no stone unturned, no matter how hard the truths were that lay underneath. Eventually, the pace of these realizations slowed, and I settled into my new reality. And I felt sad. And for the first time in my life, very alone. But I was an engineer. I solved problems for a living. I mean, if I could make a wave rise out of the surface of the ocean, I was fairly confident that I could create a formula to put my life back together. So that's what I did. The first thing I did was make a commitment to myself to do whatever it took to find happiness again. I started reading all the books. I started listening to all the podcasts. For the first time in my life, I actually started to take advice from friends. Well, some of them. I started to feel better. I started to make progress. But I seemed to be oscillating between this higher high and these lower lows. I needed more help. Everything changed in my world when I hired a coach. The first thing she helped me with was to stop being a victim to what had happened. The second thing she helped me with was getting clarity on who I was going to become now. I used meditation as a tool to get this clarity. I started having visions of sharing my story by writing a book and speaking on stage. I started to speak this reality into existence. I would become a writer. I would become a speaker. These would become my new extreme sports, which you would think would be a great relief for my mother. That is, until I started to share my vulnerable writing. At each step, I felt resistance, but that's how I knew I was going in the right direction. I had to generate courage to push through the fear. My friends and family didn't know what to think. They didn't recognize me. And to be honest, neither did I. But I liked how it felt. I liked what I saw. You see, I got lucky. Not only was I able to discover this happiness that had eluded me for so long, but my transformation had revealed these passions that I never even knew I had. But what if we could re-engineer our lives without hitting that rock bottom? I often think about what I would say to past me. I'd ask them two things. One, can you be open and curious to trying new things that bring you joy? And two, can you be humble enough to ask for help? Back in that boat in Nicaragua, my friends started to catch wave after wave. The guide paddled over to check on me. Hey, dude, pretty heavy wipeout you took back there. You ready to hop back in? The wave is looking sweet. I looked at him, and I held up the shattered remains of my board and said, "Brother, I'm having a little bit of an equipment issue here." He graciously offered me his board, but he could see the fear and the resistance in my eyes. So he said to me, "Brother, you're going to have to hop back in at some point. Let this be your moment." And he was right. I grabbed his board, I paddled back out, and within moments, I was riding down one of the biggest and fastest waves I had ever been on, all while wearing that same big smile as my classmate Scotty. Just like I had survived the breakup and awakened to this new world, I'd survived the fury of the ocean and been gifted the ride of my life. I was fortunate to hit my rock bottom and discover these new passions. But perhaps you're still searching for your magic. And if so, I invite you to apply these three things: commitment, clarity, courage. Number one, can you get committed to change where you have settled in your life? Number two, can you find the clarity on who you are and what you love to do? Number three, can you generate that courage to push through the fear and live the life of your dreams? Don't wait to hit your rock bottom before you change your world. Let this be your moment to re-engineer your life and awaken to happiness.